Solving quadratic equations by formula. I need you to know the formula. Okay? I need you to know the formula. So at the top of your paper, please make sure you have it written down. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. You cannot follow a director, don't sing. Okay? Now, in this formula, one of the places where people make or are confused is they do this. X equals this whole thing. Okay? X equals starts the equation. Okay? That division line doesn't include the x equals. It starts after the x equals, so just be careful about that, please. Okay? Now, before we can start talking about the being able to use this, there's some things that you need to know. Okay? One of those things is you need to know about complex numbers. Okay? Complex numbers are numbers with a real part and an imaginary part. Okay? We use the letter I to designate when we have imaginary parts. Okay? So we'll get into that really quick. First of all, I is the number you can square to get an answer of -1. So I squared equals -1. That's what you need to know. The other way we define it is I is the square root of -1. I equals the square root of -1. Do those two things make sense? If I have I squared equals -1 and I take the square root of both sides, does it make sense that I would get I equals the square root of -1? I is the imaginary number. For example, let's go to examples. You guys always do better with examples. Okay? If I have the square root of 49, let me show you really quick what's actually happening. I really have the square root of -1 times 49. Right? Doesn't that make sense to you? So, because of the rules of square roots, I can really say the square root of -1 times the square root of 49. What did I just tell you was equal to the square root of -1? I. And what's the square root of 49? 7. So what's the answer to the square root of -49? 7i. Okay? 7i. Now, for the record, my favorite one to do of this is this. What is that? It just brings back fond memories of when I was in high school. Okay. All right. Go to B. I've worn glasses since I was in 2nd grade. Okay, so B. Do we have to do this every time, this work right here, or can we go straight to the answer? 11i. What about this? What's 17 minus 42? -25? So what's the square root of -25? 5i. Now I have to be even more picky. More picky. I know you love when I'm picky. Okay? And I need to go back right here. What is the square root of 49? What times itself equals 49? I agree. What else times itself is 49? -7. So if I ask you for the square root of -49, you should really say plus or minus 7i. What's the square root of -121? Plus or minus 11i. What about this one? Plus or minus 5i. Okay? D is a little different, but just slightly. Do I know the square root of -1? It's I. Do I know the square root of 3? No. So we put I root 3. And in fact, plus or minus. Right? So what about this last one right here? $12 plus or minus 6i. 6 plus or minus 3i. We good? Ask me. I don't know if these new calculators do this or not, because we haven't gotten here yet. But if I say the square root of negative 36, non-real calculation, it just won't let you. Okay? That's a very good question. I do not know how to change the mode of this calculator yet. On the other calculators, there was a mode where it was either real or imaginary. I honestly don't know how to change the mode yet. So if any of you guys know, or if any of you guys can figure it out, please let me know tomorrow. I'll also look and see if we can find it. What? I know where the I is. I just don't know about the mode. Okay? We can talk about that later, though. Okay? We can talk about that later. Jordan, that was a good question. Okay? So, here's some other stuff I need you to know first as well. Okay? In a complex number, the complex number is the sum of a real number and an imaginary number, and is usually written in the form a plus bi. A is the real part. Bi is the imaginary part. And it's the imaginary part because it has the I in it. Okay? So if I show you F and say, I need you to tell me the real part and the imaginary part, what are you going to say? What's the real part? 25. What's the imaginary part? There's not one, right? What about G? What's the real part? If it's in the form a plus bi, what's the real part? I have to go back and change something on F. We'll finish this one real quick though, right? What's the imaginary part? 25i. So if I have to write this as like this form, wouldn't it be 0 plus 25i? Then fix F. What should it look like? 25 plus 0i. So what's the imaginary part then? 0i. Okay? Look at H. What's the real part? 3. What's the imaginary part? Negative 5i. You good? Okay, are you ready for your mind to be blown? Okay, let's do K. 36 minus 12i plus 12i minus 4i squared. So what if I told you the answer was 40? What happens here? That's 0, right? Negative 12i and positive 12i is 0. So I have 36 minus 4i squared. What's I squared equal? Oh. So I have negative 1 times negative 4, which is, so what is 36 plus 4? OMG. Complex conjugates. Complex conjugates sounds like a really hard thing. It's really not. Okay? Complex conjugate says that if I have 2 plus 3i, I also have to have 2 minus 3i. It's required. So if I have 25, what's the well, we don't want to do that one. That one's too easy. What about this one? If I have this one, negative 3 plus 6i, what's my conjugate? Negative 3 minus 6i. If I have negative 12 minus 5i, what must I also have? Negative 12 plus 5i. What if I have 2/3 minus 1/5 I? 2/3 plus 1/5 I. Is that difficult? No. Okay. So finally we're to actually solving some stuff. Not quite with the quadratic formula yet, and we may end up having to watch another video on that, but we'll see. Okay? Solve 6x squared plus 96 equals 0. While I could use the quadratic formula for this, it's not the best choice. I don't have a b term, do I? So the best choice here would be to subtract 96 from both sides. When I do that, I get 6x squared equals negative 96. Now what? Divide both sides by 6. X squared equals? How about negative 16? How do I solve for x? Square root of both sides? What's the square root of x squared? What's the square root of negative 1? I. What's the square root of 16? So I have my favorite one. But you also make sure you have plus or minus. Oh, why do I have to have plus or minus? Because the conjugates, right? All right, any questions about that? Ask me. Correct. If the number that you're trying to find the square root of is not a negative, you don't have to put the I. Okay? Okay. We're not going to do that. We just don't have time. It's a time issue. It's not that I don't want you to know it. Okay? Okay, what I'm going to need you to do is I'm going to need you to read this section. Okay? I need you to read them. It's mostly stuff that we've talked about for the last couple days, just all together in one chart. Okay? So this is finally asking you to use the quadratic formula. Alright? Now, I do need to point out a discriminant. Okay? For the record, I'm not asking anyone to sit at the back of the bus. That's discriminate. It's a different word. Okay? Discriminant is part of the quadratic formula. It's this part right here. Not the square root sign, just the b squared minus 4ac part. The discriminant will tell you these things. It'll tell you if it only has one rational root. It'll tell you if it has two rational roots. It'll tell you if it has two irrational roots, and it'll tell you if it has two complex roots. Okay? So read through that, and then I want you to do your best. I want you to try number 1, number 2, and number 3. And I also want you to be brave and try number 4. Okay? Any questions? We may have to come back to the back of this tomorrow, depending on how things go tonight. Please have a wonderful day.